An unexpected win for a Bulgarian diplomat amid allegations of manipulation, bribery and corruption. Irina Bokova scoops the UNESCO chairmanship, losing out to her Egyptian Farouk Hosni, who'd been widely favoured as the front-runner. So why did Hosni fail to win the vote despite support from Arab and African nations? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Mariam Namazi. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, is supposed to protect cultural treasures, promote literacy and help the advancement of science. But its latest leadership contest has been making headlines around the world. Bulgaria's ambassador to France beat the Egyptian culture minister to the top job this week. The Egyptian had been the favorite, but his controversial past appears to have galvanized opposition from Western countries. The first round of voting began last week. UNESCO members had to go back to the ballot 5 times before a candidate received the 30 votes needed to win. In the first 3 ballots, Farouk Hosni secured over 20 votes each time. That's 10 more than his nearest rival, Irina Bokova. But dramatically, in the 4th ballot, the two tied at 29 votes each. Finally, in the 5th round, Bokova won by just 4 votes over Hosni. In reaction, some observers alleged bribery, although UNESCO firmly denies any fraud took place. And introducing the new Director General of UNESCO, the first woman to hold that post in the history of the organization, Irina Bokova. She was Bulgaria's Minister of Foreign Affairs in 1996 to 97. She's currently the country's ambassador to France and Monaco. She founded the European Policy Forum, an NGO that promotes European identity and encourages dialogue to overcome divisions in Europe. And among the 9 candidates up for the job, giving her some stiff competition, was Egypt's Minister of Culture, Farouk Hosni, a man who's been accused of playing a key role in the country's contentious censorship. Hosni is a professional artist. He's had several exhibitions across the world and won many awards for his work. He's no stranger to controversy, though. Just last year, Hosni said he would be willing to burn Israeli books in Egyptian libraries. He has since apologized for that remark. Well, joining us now are our guests in Ottawa, Alain Paul Martin. He's chairman of the Professional Development Institute and author of the report, Overhauling UNESCO and Strengthening Its Essence. In Cairo, Ahmed Haggag, he's Secretary General of the Africa Society and writes for the UN Post. That's an online news service on UN affairs. And in Paris, we welcome the newly elected Director General of UNESCO, Irina Bokova. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Irina Bokova, if I can come to you first, has this ballot exposed some serious divisions within UNESCO?
No, by all means. I don't believe that some democratic elections can bring to divisions. It's an open competition. We have been 9 candidates. I've always said I respect all candidates. There were very strong figures there. And the last round of elections, we stayed with Mr. Farouk Hosni, Minister of Culture of Egypt, to whom I have expressed my friendship, my respect, as to the other candidates. Of course, you know how in democratic elections it runs. You compete, then somebody wins, and then I received the congratulations of Mr. Hosni, which I appreciate very much. And we have decided to stay together and to continue working together. I don't believe that it's a divisive vote.
Mr. Martin, there have been questions and concerns raised about just how democratic this vote was, although it was a very long, drawn-out process with 5 rounds of voting. Can you give us a sense of what might have been going on behind the scenes between each of these rounds?
Well, first I want to congratulate Irina Bokova, Ambassador Bokova. It's a great day for you and great day for the UNESCO. And I want to say hello to Dr. Haggag. To look back at your question, I think as Ambassador Bokova spoke, democracy was at work. We have had several rounds, 5 rounds, and regional alliances are not something new. And I think that the members of the UNESCO will unite behind Mrs. Bokova as they have done behind the previous Director Generals.
Mr. Haggag, what's your take on that? What do you make of the process about how the decision is made about who heads UNESCO?
First of all, I would like to congratulate Mrs. Bokova for her election, and I'm sure she will be on the helm of this important agency, which is dedicated for culture in the world. She has a big task before her, and I hope she will not allow politicization to interfere in the work of UNESCO vis-à-vis countries and culture segments of this world.
Irina Bokova, there has been some controversy surrounding this vote, particularly in regards to Farouk Hosni's candidacy. Did Hosni's comments about burning Israeli books hurt his candidacy, do you think?
You know, I would rather talk about my own campaign and my own candidacy. All these last year and 4 months since the decision of my government was taken, I have tried to make a very positive, a very transparent campaign to pass messages, which I think is what one campaign should be. I visited 47 countries, I visited 8 UNESCO bureaus, I went to the World Bank, I went to Geneva, to the United Nations. I talked to dozens of, if not hundreds of people. I met ministers, presidents. I think it paid because it's an important process. Elections is not only casting one vote. Elections is, for such a high post, it's not one day of elections or even 2 days of elections. It's a work of a whole year. And all this time I have paid respect to all the candidates, because we had also other very interesting, very competent, also strong persons as candidates. And it's a process, and I'm very happy that after this process, I think that my message for a tolerance, for a positive atmosphere passed away. I think what is for me more important, and I have always tried not to comment on what others did or what others did not do, but rather to pass my messages, to see what I can do in order to convince the members of the Executive Council that I'm the candidate to be elected. So I'm very happy that this could happen. From the very first day, I believe that I can make it. And of course, I had the support of my country. I had the support of 2 consecutive governments. I had the support of all the institutions, and it paid after all.
Mr. Martin, do you think that Hosni's defeat could be linked in some way to the comments that he had made about Israel?
I looked, actually, I had a class of graduate students last week, and I simply asked them as a homework to give me an idea about who they would vote for. And what's interesting is many of my students do not follow the specifics of the UNESCO in day-to-day. They went to the web and they simply picked up the profiles of each candidate. They went to Dr. Hosni's website and Mrs. Bokova's website, and I think you can see there was a vast differences in the approach to how they would lead UNESCO. Mrs. Bokova was focusing on the mission rather than events. Mr. Hosni was a bit event-driven. I think Mrs. Bokova has demonstrated that she was soft on people, very hard on issues. In terms of broader understanding of global issues, Mrs. Bokova, as she indicated, consulted about 45 countries.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite remarkable. Sorry to interrupt you. It's quite remarkable, though, isn't it, that a culture minister should talk about burning books, particularly one who could potentially be the face of the UN's cultural educational body?
Indeed, and I think one of the characteristics of great leaders is to remain focused on mission rather than events. And the fact that he has had outbursts would not have been positive for the UNESCO.
So do you then think that there is a sense that Hosni would have been a divisive figure to head UNESCO, that it would have been too political or too controversial to have somebody who'd made those sorts of comments at the helm of the organization?
I wouldn't say necessarily that he would have been divisive. He would have tried to do his best And I'm sure that the organization would have worked together with him as a team, but coming with such baggage would not have helped.
Irina Bokova, have these allegations of fraud marred your appointment to this post to an extent?
To be frank, I don't know exactly about what allegations of fraud. It was a very transparent process. The elections, all the votes cast were shown to the Executive Council. I don't believe there was any fraud. I think I'm elected by a very transparent procedure. Everybody saw. I think that getting 31 votes is a very decent win during such an elections, very contested elections. And
Sure.
I think that 31 votes mean that all different regions have supported me. I got support from Africa, I got support from Asia.
Let me tell
I
you.
got support from Europeans, from...
Sure, sorry to interrupt you, but
Yes.
let me tell you, one UNESCO official who spoke on condition of anonymity was quoted as saying that at least one person was ejected from the agency's building by UNESCO security staff for trying to bribe delegates. That happened on Monday. UNESCO has denied this, but nevertheless, just for these sorts of allegations to emerge is pretty damning, isn't it?
Well, I prefer to think that I really was elected by a very sincere, very clear and very transparent vote of 31 members of the executive
Sure, but
board.
it's not just about your specific. Absolutely, it's not just about your specific vote, though. There have been these sorts of allegations surrounding UNESCO as a body, as an organisation, for many years now. It's not the first time UNESCO has faced these allegations. In fact, in 1999, the election of Koïchiro Matsuura was marred by allegations of vote rigging and corruption as well. I mean, does this problem exist within the organisation?
You know, I think that, and I would strongly reject this attempts to create some kind of an atmosphere of how to put it, of fraud, of negativism around UNESCO. We have seen, unfortunately, during the last couple of months, probably some anonymous letters going around, which were, I think, this organization denigrated this organization. I'm very much against it. I think that if somebody has to say something, he should go out and speak, and it's not about some kind of anonymous letters or writings going around. I'm strongly against it. I don't believe that this is the way we could reform an organization or work together.
What might you say to your critics who would say that perhaps you are not qualified for this job, that it should have gone to somebody else?
Well, I think that these are elections, and if they thought that somebody else was more qualified than me, so let be it. If I was elected as I was voted for, I prefer to think that I had proven also to the executive board that I can do the job, and I was elected. I think this is the best criteria we have in any elections. It's afterwards whether you can win the elections or you don't win the elections. No other criteria in my mind.
Mr. Martin, does this raise the issue of how about the process that takes place to elect figures to the top jobs within the UN? This issue of nationality, does that need to be taken into account? For example, with the UN Secretary General, there's no official rule about rotating the post according to region, but it was widely accepted that the next UN Secretary General after Kofi Annan would be from Asia. UNESCO has never actually had a leader from the Arab world since its founding. So is nationality, is that something that needs to be taken into account?
Well, I think UNESCO never had a woman as leader, and nor did it have someone from Eastern Europe as a leader. And in the past, the UNESCO didn't have anyone from Asia, so we had Mr. Matsuura, and he turned out to be a very competent leader. And I think with respect to Mrs. Bokova, only time will tell. I think when the rubber hits the road will be, first she's going to have a honeymoon over the next few weeks, and how she uses that capital will also give us some indications about her style of leadership. I would prefer that she comes to visit us in Canada, but knowing her competence and experience from the past, I'm confident she will probably visit one of the Arab countries, probably Egypt, to show tolerance and openness to the Arab world.
Mr.
And I
Haggag,
think from the
if I can
perspective
come
of the
to
Arab
you, it was a very
and
close
Muslim
race. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Haggag, if I can come to you, it was a very close race. The ballot was quite secretive. Is there enough transparency in the way such votes are held within the UN?
No, I have been experiencing many votes in the UN during my work before. There is a lot of maneuvers, and there are fair maneuvers and unfair maneuvers. What struck us in these elections, the quantity and the magnitude of the unfair maneuvers. Some Western powers, induced by some Israeli lobby in the United States and Britain and Germany, they were not satisfied from the very beginning with the election of the candidature of Mr. Farouk Hosni. And they thought from the very beginning he would be knocked away from the first ballot, and they were surprised that the margin between his support and the margin of the next candidate have been very large. So they were very frenetic. There was a vicious, and I underscore vicious, campaign in many press in the West and the United States against Mr. Hosni, and they never mentioned any other candidates. And this is what struck the Egyptian public by the aggressiveness of such attacks on Mr. Hosni, trying to dissuade as many countries not to support him. But they were surprised by the first vote, the second vote, third votes, and they became very alarmed when there was a tie. And with the United Nations, you know, sometimes they can use some in order to change positions. But nevertheless, I think Mr. Hosni
Mr. Martin,
did a very
what's your
good
view on that?
job.
Do you agree with Mr. Haggag? Were you surprised at all at the outcome of this race?
I think until the fourth round, well, they were equal in the fourth round, which showed that Mr. Hosni had a serious group of nations that supported him. And democracy is going to be always messy. It's not perfect. The majority-minority role is the best we have right now. And I think we have to give Mrs. Bokova the benefit of the doubt. And at the same time, we have to turn the page on the past. And I think Dr. Hosni himself has congratulated Mrs. Bokova. And rather than focusing on past divisions, we really have to focus on tomorrow and see how it's going to work out.
Irina Bokova, has UNESCO's incumbent Director General Koïchiro Matsuura, has he made any progress in tackling the cronyism and mismanagement within the organization? Because he did promise to make reforms.
Oh yes, he did. I think that the current Director General, Mr. Matsuura, started extremely important reforms in times of difficulties for the organization. We should not forget that if you compare UNESCO, what UNESCO was 10 years ago, or even before that, with a much bigger budgets at some points 20 years ago, with a different setting, with a different place in the world, then UNESCO was left by some important countries, that budgets were cut. Then the overall United Nations system after the end of the Cold War passed through a very difficult change, and I think that Mr. Matsuura was courageous enough to start reforms in terms of having more transparency, of better management, in terms of putting in order the process of decentralization of the organization, and what is most important, he started really the debate and talk about the integration of UNESCO into the worldwide coherence into one UN. I think this is the biggest challenge in front of this organization, is how this organization fits within this very important process of reforming the United Nations, because after all, UNESCO is part of the United Nations. So I give credit to Mr. Matsuura for what he did, and I've decided and I've promised, I put this as my commitment to continue this reform with a lot more vigor, and of course with the taking into account what is happening nowadays in the world, because the situation is changing every day. The world is in front of our eyes, is changing with the crisis which is a financial, economic, but also moral, ethical. So I think that we all are having the same challenge, and we have to all work together to really make UNESCO efficient and to make UNESCO work for what its core mandate.
Mr. Martin, a report by the Heritage Foundation speaks about UNESCO in 1984 when the US pulled out of the organization, saying that nepotism and connections were more important than qualifications in securing a position within UNESCO. Now, given the controversy we've seen over this vote, the allegations that we've had in the past over the years about there being pledges and promises made, trades going on, vote buying, etc. Does this legacy still exist to an extent?
Well, my report on the UNESCO was very critical about the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. I think Mr. Matsuura brought back the United States to the UNESCO, which was one of my recommendations. At the same time, I think, as Mrs. Bokova indicated, he has increased transparency. He has focused on the virtual world to increase access. We should not forget the key issues. One is illiteracy. We have 3/4 billion people who cannot read. Education is in dire need, not only in developing countries, but even in a developed world, because very few people understand what's going on with respect to the current economic situation. We have two systems of governance. We have the political and the capitalist system, and the two have to work in sync. And capitalism has to serve democracy, and right now, that's not necessarily the case. And so the UNESCO is the best place we have to debate that kind of issue. And I'm really trying to look at tomorrow. And what the Heritage Foundation may have said may be valid for the 80s, but I think we will always have some inequities. But I think the question is, are we moving forward to eliminate or to mitigate some of these inequities?
Mr. Haggag, one response from you on what Mr. Martin says. Are we moving forward in terms of tackling those challenges? How much more needs to be done in terms of reform within UNESCO, in terms of improving management, the running of the organization?
Yes, I think many Western countries still consider UNESCO is a domain for Western culture, and they are not ready to open to other civilizations and cultures of the world. There was an understanding, I think, accepted by many governments of the world that this time there will be a post for the Arab world. But of course, they have to see the qualifications of all the candidates. And in all fairness, I think, not because I'm an Egyptian, Mr. Hosni is highly qualified for this post. But anyhow, this is something now finished, and we hope that Mrs. Bokova will be open to all cultures of the world, including the Arab world, and really not to politicize, not to allow politicization.
I have to say that I come from a country which is very much multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious. My family comes from a small town in southwest of Bulgaria, and 80% of the population are Muslims. I've lived in this environment. I'm very much committed to work with all the regions and to pass a message of tolerance. I've never believed in the theory of clash among civilizations, and I think that it is not a defeat of this message of tolerance. It's rather on the contrary.
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Irina Bokova, the new Director General of UNESCO. Thank you very much indeed for your time. In Cairo, Ahmed Haggag and Alain Paul Martin. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.